Aloha and welcome to this very brief screencast where I'm going to talk about issue-driven project management, which is an agile project management process that I've designed for this class. And so what I want you to get out of this screencast is to recognize that software project management is extremely complicated, and that really each kind of project is going to require to some extent its own custom project management process if you want to, do the management effectively. And then I want to give you an overview of the process that I want you to adapt for this class, which is very, very simple, but still conforms to most of the characteristics of an agile project management process. So the deal with software project management, what makes it so hard is that doing it effectively requires a process that's really contextual. It's going to depend upon how many people are in the team. If you've got 4 people in the team, it's really different from 40, which itself is really different from 400. There are software projects that have 400 people on it. The characteristics of the project, what are you trying to accomplish? What are the time frames? What is the domain? The personalities of the team members, how they like to work together, when they like to work, what they like to work on, what the customers need and their personalities, what is the technology to be developed, and very importantly, what types of quality assurance are required. So software to be developed for a startup has very different kinds of quality assurance than software that's being developed for the SpaceX program, or some kind of missile or satellite, etc. So there's a lot of different kinds of project management styles out there, and what we're going to do is try to boil this down to one that actually works for your specific circumstances. So what I want to preface the process that you're going to use with is to kind of talk a little bit first about what are the characteristics of agile project management approaches. We talked about agile a little bit in the previous screencast, and I want to give you 6 different features that tend to characterize an agile project management strategy. One is time box development. The idea there, you can see this with Eclipse in particular. They say every June 1st there's going to be a new release of Eclipse, and the set of features that will be in that release are not specified till quite shortly before the release, but you can guarantee that there will be a release on a certain date. Second characteristic of Agile is that you want to focus on delivering some business value early on in the process. So very quickly you want to build a system that does something useful for your customers. And that is unlike kind of older project management philosophies like waterfall, where you might have a lot of work done up front on specification and designs that don't lead to any clear business value, and there's no sense that the early versions of the system would have actual business value. Third feature is that you do continuous adaptive planning. The idea is that you do good planning for the near term, and you do very coarse planning for the far term. In our class, you're not going to do any planning beyond the next week and a half of development. It's going to be at a very extreme version of this. Older styles of project management might create this huge Gantt chart for the next year and a half, and that doesn't happen in Agile. A very related idea is that you only really start detailing the features in a particular, the characteristics of a new feature at the point where you're going to implement them. So you do that because as you move through development, the characteristics of a feature that's going to be implemented in the future might change a great deal based upon the work that you're doing now. So you don't want to do kind of a lot of redesign. And then finally, you have continuous testing. That's the idea that you develop tests in parallel with product development, not as some add-on process at the end. So let's look at Agile project management as we're going to practice it in this class. So the first thing is there's always something for you to work on. That makes sense. You don't want to be idle. And you know what that task is that you're supposed to work on. So it's clear what you're supposed to be doing. When you're done with whatever you're working on now, you know what you're going to do next. Okay, that seems obvious, but not all strategies will lead to that. This is a really hard one, but it's if you're going to be effective, you must rarely be waiting for someone else to finish what they're doing in order to do what you need to do. And this is where the art of project management comes in, is how do you take the project and decompose it into tasks where people can work concurrently. Completing your task actually helps the project move forward, seems obvious, and everybody can see what the state of the project is at all times. In particular, I, as kind of a virtual member of all the groups, I want to be able to see what the state of the project is at all times in terms of what tasks people are working on, what tasks have been completed, and what are the upcoming tasks. And if we do all these things, then if there's some problem in the project, then it should be pretty obvious to everybody quite quickly. And that means that you can actually fix things relatively quickly. So issue-driven project management is basically the simplest approach I can come up with that are going to satisfy the goals of Agile project management and these characteristics of an efficient software process on the last two slides. So the rules for issue-driven project management are we're going to divide up the work into tasks. Tasks do not take longer than 3 days in general. You specify each task in a GitHub issue. You assign each task or issue to a single person. You organize your tasks into milestones with a hard due date, which I'll specify. And then you manage these milestones via GitHub project boards. And at all times, you define enough tasks and you assign them such that everybody always has at least one issue that they're responsible for closing at all time through the milestone. Okay, so how does this manifest itself? I'll show you a few quick screenshots. Here's the issues page for GitHub project. Turns out to be portfolios, and you can see that all of the tasks, all the significant tasks for that project are specified in terms of GitHub issues. Here's a single issue, and you can see three things here. One is that it's assigned to a single person, not to multiple people. It's placed on a particular project board, and the issue is described in some detail. Okay, so you actually try to specify what that particular task involves. To manage a particular milestone, we're going to create a GitHub project board, and you can see this one's called M3 for milestone 3. It's got 3 columns, a to-do column, an in-progress column, and a done column. And issues will all start out in the to-do column, and then when they're actively being worked on, they'll be assigned to someone and put into the in-progress column. And then when that issue gets closed, it gets moved to the done column. And this is, you can use an automated Kanban board setting in GitHub when you set up your project board to have things move in these columns in a somewhat automated fashion. So milestones, they partition a project into phases. They all have an end date, and you can only have one milestone active at a time. And one of the interesting things here is that we're not going to use GitHub's milestones mechanism because they subsequently have come out with a feature called project boards, and we can use project boards to represent milestones just fine, and it really obviates the need to have this separate milestone. You could do it. It adds some extra overhead, doesn't provide a lot of value. So I find that just using project boards, having a separate project board for each milestone works really well. So as I said, each works associated with a project should be captured as a task. Every task is represented an issue, and therefore, since you're working on one task at a time, each commit should be associated with a task. So what you can do to help associate commits with tasks is to put the issue number somewhere in your commit message. The meaning of all, okay, so I said that every issue, every task should be represented as an issue, but it turns out there's always going to be very small things that don't warrant an issue because they take 5 to 10 minutes to do. So what I would say is the meaning of all is almost all. And if you come into a situation where 10 to 20% of your commits don't have an associated issue, then you probably haven't represented the tasks associated with your project correctly. So how do you carry out this particular issue-driven project management? You're not going to try to create issues for the entire project at the beginning. Instead, you're only going to plan out the issues associated with the current milestone. And then you need to have meetings at least twice a week so that you can get together with your teammates and update the set of issues associated with the current milestone, making things done or adding new issues or taking an existing issue and splitting it up into 2 or 3 other issues, whatever's needed to keep the plan as represented on your project board accurate. And basically at any time, you just have to make sure that nobody runs out of an issue to work on. Okay, so you don't have to necessarily figure out at the beginning of the milestone all the issues you're going to need to create for the milestone. You just need to create enough issues that everybody's got work to do until 2 or 3 days from now when you're going to get together again. And that, as I said, this approach requires frequent face-to-face meetings to be effective. It's hard to do this unless you get together face-to-face. Okay, so how does issue-driven project management satisfy the key characteristics of those 2 slides? First, there's always going to be a task for you to work on. You're always going to know what task to work on because it's going to be assigned to you, and it's going to be in the in progress column in the project board. And when you're done with the task, you know what to do next because there should be another task in the to-do column that is either already assigned to you or that you can just assign to yourself and that you can take that on. And then you're rarely blocked waiting for somebody else, and that hopefully will happen rarely, but if it does happen, then you resolve it at the next daily meeting. Completing a task brings the project closer to completion. That's because if there's a task that really isn't that important, you can discard it. The state of the project is visible because you've got the project board and the set of issues. And it's easy to find breakdowns in project management because either someone's waiting, they don't have any tasks assigned to them, or someone's had a task for a long time and not completing it, or someone's waiting for someone else to complete their task. So it's quite obvious when things aren't working well. If we look at the characteristics of agile project management, issue-driven project management almost satisfies all the features. We do have time box development. You are delivering business value as of the first milestone. You are doing continuous adaptive planning and emergent feature discovery. The one thing that this process does not include, at this point anyway, is continuous testing. And we'll get to the testing module a little later. Then you'll have an opportunity to integrate that. All right, so what do you want to do next? You want to define your tasks, create a project board, and get those issues on it.